So my specific topic this time, unfortunately, I have a few more, but the first one I chose was setting and achieving a goal. And this can be specific to musicians. This can be specific to any walks of life, which is really kind of a good thing. I often find a correlation between the life of a musician and life itself, how to get from one point to the other, and being as smart as possible and not wasting time. So I think the first thing we need to dive into is determine what your goal really is. If you're a trumpet player, maybe your goal, if I ask you right away, what's your goal, your ultimate goal, and you say, I want to sound like Freddie Hubbard. That's an amazing goal. We all want to sound like Freddie Hubbard. So first of all, figuring out exactly what that goal is, naming it, give it a name. And I have a list of things actually that I'm reading from. I'm kind of obsessed with making lists, but I think that's important in all these facets of being a musician and trying to advance. Make a list. Actually, write it down or type it. Put a note on your phone. Put it into words, because sometimes we have these broad, general ideas of what we want to do. Yeah, Dwayne, it is an amazing goal. Freddie Hubbard would be an amazing goal. So we have these broad, general ideas of what we want to do, our goal, but it's not specific enough. And when it's not specific enough, we don't know how to go about achieving it. First of all, ask yourself, is it what you really want? If you wake up, if I could, be the magic genie and bless you with every single lick that Freddie Hubbard played, would that be what you want? And I remember I talk about Sean Jones a lot because he was 2 years ahead of me in Youngstown State University. And I remember the first time I met him, he said, what do you want to do? What kind of music do you want to play? And I said, I want to play Dixieland music, New Orleans music. That's all I want to do. And he said, are you sure about that? And at first I took it as like a insult. But then I thought about it. I said, is that all I want to do? And the truth is no. I mean, is all I want to do to play like Freddie Hubbard? No. But I want to learn a lot from him. And then that's where we get more specific into what exactly you want. What's the outcome? Are you adamant about that goal? Is it something that you're willing to give up hours out of each day? Are you willing to give up a whole day, a few times a week? Are you willing to do that? Ask yourself that, because if you're not willing to do that, then that's where you have to start figuring out, is this a attainable goal or not? So the commitment factor. How committed are you? Test yourself. Try to prove to yourself. And this is all personal. These goals, if you set a goal out, I'm specifically talking about music, but like I said, you can relate it to other walks of life. But these goals are personal. You don't have to tell anyone. Sometimes it ends up hurting if we tell someone, or the wrong person, because they may look at us and say, oh, come on, you really think that you can do that? Or, so sometimes that kind of hurts our goal or our ability to achieve that goal. So it can, if you don't want to tell anyone, it's your own personal goal. Keep it locked in, but keep your eyes on the prize. And call it exactly what it is. What is that goal? What is that specific goal? What name is it? Give it a name. Don't be broad. This isn't the time for broad. Goals have to be specific and true. Another thing I was thinking about is dreams versus goals. We all have our dreams, and they're great. They're important. They keep us happy, hopefully. But, dreams can, come out of nowhere, and maybe nothing happens from them. Goals are something that we actually put aside and we say, we want to achieve this. How am I going to achieve this? So now that we've kind of set that goal, let's figure out how we're going to break it down. I'm going to keep going back to that Freddie Hubbard idea. For those of you who haven't heard Freddie Hubbard, please check him out. He is one of jazz history's probably one of the most influential trumpet players. So if I say I want to be like Freddie Hubbard, what does that mean? What are there multiple facets about getting to that goal? All right, so if I say, wait a minute, I can't, it's kind of a little too much to just be a broad, general Freddie Hubbard copy. What do I like about Freddie Hubbard? And that's when, you know, the specific things, like for instance, tonguing. This is something that I'm working on right now. Getting my attack, my tongue in line. So these are things that I'm doing every day. And this is, I have another workshop that's coming up. Just check the schedule. And that's one is developing your own sound, but also another one is technique. So I'll be getting more into this, but right? So I'm working on those specific things. What does that mean in the long run? I could take that anywhere I want at this point, but my goal is to take it to get my tongue to where it is, where I want it to be, and then move it to another level. So we're always thinking about these giant goals, but we have to start off at the small part of it. So narrow it down. Don't be afraid to make it as easy and mundane and embarrassingly boring as possible. Because again, this is you. We're not talking about anyone else. You know, when you're in the practice room, it's you in the practice room. You know, I'm one of the many people that hates to practice around other people. You know, I look, you know, if I'm at my office at USF, I kind of make sure no one's around so they're not hearing me, you know, mess up and sound horrible, you know, because I'm working on these annoying, mundane things that will help translate and get me to the next level that I want to be. So for instance, that tonguing exercise, I'm working every day. I try to figure out another tonguing exercise so I can get that crisp, clear attack. What will that do? That will help me get closer to my goal. My specific goal is not to sound exactly like Freddie Hubbard, even though I love him, but I would love to get his kind of tonguing down. So that's helping me achieve a further goal. Another part of this is research. Don't be afraid to research. I talk to my students about this a lot. You can't get from point A to point B without having someone or something tell you how to get there. Sometimes we kind of like to focus on our own abilities and say, no, I can do this. You know, the ego starts to come in, and please squash the ego as much as you can, because this getting from point A to point B is not about ego. It's about being as humble as possible and admitting that we can't get there on our own, but we need to reach out and do some research. So research, you know, it's the annoying answer, you know, Google it. But honestly, Google is amazing. You know, if you want, let's talk about another goal. If you're a music educator, you have a bunch of private students, or if you teach at a high school, and maybe you're not on your instrument, your primary instrument, as much as possible, but you're looking for that way to connect more with each individual student. Googling is a great resource. Google ways to get your playing from this point to the next point. Obviously, the other way, the best way, I believe, is to reach out and talk to a physical person. Give someone a call. I absolutely love when I get a call from a friend or a student or or just an email asking, hey, I'm struggling with this specific thing because I want to get from here to here and I can't get past there. Do you have any ideas? And it's a joy for me to be able to do that. And I'm sure it is for many other musicians. We're not talking about levels here. We're talking about reaching out and finding ways for us to get from one level to the other. So if I talk to, Wynton Marsalis, or if I talk to a 13-year-old kid that plays the trumpet, I'm sure both could give me valuable information that I haven't heard before. So we need to be open and humble to accept all of that. Again, read, listen. Listening is one of the best things that I think we overlook a lot. And I dedicated a specific session coming up in this series to listening, because it's something that I think we all say, okay, yeah, I've heard Miles Smiles, I've heard all those, recordings. I know, I know I can probably sing my way through most of those solo, that's not listening. Listening is being completely engulfed in this music, or whatever music. If you're trying to be a classical musician, if you want to play in the local band, symphonic band, and your playing isn't where you want it to be, you feel like you're not keeping up, that's when you go and listen, among other things. But listening, go back and find these great recordings, the original recordings, if they exist, or recordings of your favorite musicians doing these, and figure out exactly what they're doing. True listening. A lot of times when I'm in my car, I don't listen to music because it's too distracting. When I truly listen to music, I'm at home and nothing else is happening. It's me and the recording, and I want to get as close to that as possible. So now it comes up to setting a plan. And this is when the list comes back. Actually, write down that list. How do you get from one step to the other? And it's not necessarily initially about achieving that goal. That kind of freaks me out. I get kind of, start sweating. I get nervous. If I see this big goal I have to achieve, oh no, there's no way I'm going to make it in time. Oh no, it's just too much. I don't think I'm good enough. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about giving yourself little markers, little mini goals that add up to that big goal. And before you know it, you'll be closer than you ever imagined to that big goal. Little mini goals. If you want to, if you want to be able to teach your clarinet student better technique, work on your own technique, your own specific technique. Look up as much information as possible on that. There are a lot of, like sometimes I shy away from YouTube videos, but there's some really great videos that kind of really lay out exactly what we need to be working on to get us from one point to the other. Going back to that tonguing exercise that I was doing, the great Marcus Printup, who plays in Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, he's been there for many, many years. He posted something the other day, and it was specifically about tonguing. And it was like, oh, I felt like he was talking to me, So I took that exercise. Check it out if you have him on Facebook. He just did a classic trumpet etude that's all tonguing, and he takes it through the circle of fourths. And at first, my first thought was, I need to do that, but it's too hard. I don't have the patience. And then I kept thinking about it, and I thought, oh wait, this works for my goal, my ultimate goal. So I can use that, and I'll work on that every single day. And now, this morning it was okay, but it was a lot better than it was maybe a week ago. So that right there, that mini goal has turned into a bigger goal, and it's getting me closer to the final goal. One major thing, there's a story about John Coltrane when he met a young saxophone student. and the saxophone student, wanted his autograph, same thing that everyone wanted. But he asked him something very specific. He said, "Do you have any advice for me?" And he said, "Don't waste time." And that's all he said, which I think is really poignant, because that really comes down to what we need to be doing. Everyone's day is completely different. We all have our different schedules and responsibilities. And that's where writing another list of each hour, we can break it down to half an hour. That's all you need. Half an hour, you can accomplish so much in half an hour. 5 minutes, I've done some amazing things in 5 minutes, and I hope and the idea is to continue that so that it grows into something bigger. So write out your schedule. And especially now these days, like my schedule has been turned on its side, so I'm just, and right now it's a lot of mental planning, like, okay, wait a minute, everything's completely different. How do I figure out my schedule? How do I make the most of my day now? Now that I'm not playing gigs, or I don't have rehearsals, or I don't have to get up early. Should I still get up early? Yes, I probably should, just to kind of get the most out of it and get a good start. And that's helping me towards a further goal. And then the closer we get, we have to realize when we've achieved it and when we can start lining up another goal or branching off. Sometimes the crazy thing is, sometimes after all this work, when we actually do achieve the goal, we might not be happy with the goal. It might not be really what we wanted to have in the first place. So sometimes we need to kind of branch off and say, okay, I've gotten to this. I'm proud of myself, pat on the back. And now how can I branch off to another aspect that will help me further? So steady and consistent practice. And again, this is not just for musicians. This is for every walk of life, every aspect of life. Set yourself the ultimate goal and see how close you can get to it little by little.
As you were talking, I was thinking, James, do you have a routine that you follow every day, of whether it's an exercise or fundamentals? Is there something that you do every day?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually called specifically routine, which comes from the Bill Adam. All those fellow trumpet players might have heard of that. He was a very excellent professor that my teacher, Jay Coble, when I was getting my master's at USF, he studied with him. And it's just, it is a routine, which I like better than a warm up, because it's something that you get up and you do every single day. And honestly, I've tweaked it little by little, like my routine now is not the same as it was 2 years ago, but there is something that I need to do every day. It's almost it's a checklist that I need to do. And I'm working on the fundamentals mainly. I'm working on tonguing, like I'm focusing on even more now. Air control, breathing, sound, fingers. So a lot of that thing, I kind of go down the checklist, Honestly, if I would bore you with all my warm up, my routine, because it's really annoying trumpet stuff. But I think that's very important. That's when you have to get all the annoying, boring stuff out of the way so that you can get to the really good stuff after. When I was living with my sister and her husband, they used to make fun of me because my first notes of the day were always just like horrible sounds. But that's the idea. Get all the bad stuff out of the way. Get all the annoying, boring stuff out of the way so that you can get to the real meat and potatoes of the music. Because what you're doing, when you're playing an instrument, you're working on two things. You're working on the heart and soul, the musicality of it, but you have to be able to support that musicality with the technical part of the instrument.
Thank you, James. I see Chris offered a couple of questions here. I'd love to hear a couple of your specific goals. And do you ever do the routine with someone else?
I as far as the routine, I was doing it with my professor, with Jay Coble, but I do recommend, yes, doing it with other people. He used to always say, it's a good way to take a break, give your chops a rest while someone else, you play it back and forth. I do my part, and then your partner does his or hers. So it gives your chops a chance to rest and to listen and to kind of copy each other and push each other. So yeah, that's great. And the first question, what was that?
He'd love to hear a couple of your specific goals.
Okay, so my specific goals right now, well, I was talking about dreams and goals, the difference. When I recorded my album, that was a dream come true. But it wasn't a goal that I had set out and planned out. And so I was very fortunate in the fact that it was a dream and it came true thanks to some very influential people. But now one of my actual goal is to record another album. So that's where the list is. I'm going to start one of those. What am I going to record? What do I feel like I need to do that I didn't do on the first album? With whom am I going to record? Where? How am I going to pay for it? All of those specific things. That's now become a goal in my mind that I have to put into fruition. I have to map out each step of the way. If I figure out the song list, which is a hard part, even if I get one song, that means I have to dive deep into that one song. So that's a mini goal within a big goal. Learning that song, playing the chords, playing them on the piano, playing the melody as much as possible so I have it completely ingrained. So that's a main goal. And then like another thing that I'm working on is just trying to get my technique better. And I'm trying to be as specific as possible. Like I keep mentioning tonguing. It's something that I realized that I never really worked on as much as I should have. And now with this situation, I have so many hours in the day to work on it. So I have no excuse now. So I'm being more specific. I'm trying to focus specifically on that to get me to the next level technically that I want to be. We all can, that's the great thing about being an artist, is that you can always improve, you can always get better, but you have to be specific. Everyone has to be specific, completely specific, to figure out what thing they can improve on.
Hey, James.
So those are yes.
There's another question here just popped up. I don't know if you can see it on your end, from Warren. Speaking of listening, what are you listening to right now? And what have you been doing to adjust your new schedule that might help us all be more productive on or off the trumpet?
It's great. How you doing, Warren? Nice to hear from you. Warren, by the way, is also with the BNS company. I'm an artist for the BNS trumpets, and I got to meet him last year when I did a workshop, and really thankful to him and the wonderful people at BNS. So like figuring out what I'm listening to. It's funny, like with all the stuff that I could be listening to, what do you do now? So my wife and I, a lot of times we put on jazz radio, the specific jazz radio. There's one on cable that I forget the name of it, but it's just like all this stuff. I love it because if I'm in the other room, I can kind of try to trick myself and test myself to see if I know who's playing and what year and with what band. And usually there's a lot of me running into the room to see who's playing. And then a lot of times I'll take out my horn and try to play with them or try to play the melody. So I'm listening to a lot of jazz, but so that's basically classic jazz, 50s and 60s, which is my favorite era. And as opposed to going back to my CD collection, which, I'll be doing, soon, I hope. What I like is to, just to listen to things that I may have never heard before, versions I've never heard before. And a lot of those jazz radio stations are great for that. It's just like hit after hit after hit, things that you've never heard before. And that keeps my inspiration going. That keeps me, kind of on my toes, and which is a good thing. As far as, taking advantage of time, like I said, Warren, like I feel like planning out my day is the best. Before, twice a week I'd have to go to USF in Tampa, which means I have to drive an hour, which means I have to wake up this time because I want to warm up, and I had it all mapped out. And now it's like everything's up in the air, but I still want to have that, those times to depend on. So yeah, I get up every morning and I do that routine that Chris was asking about. I do that. I try to get in as much practice as possible, but I also try to, mix it up with daily life, and so I don't burn myself out, which we don't want to do.
James, do you have any specific advice to, the Jazz Holiday Foundation supports this culture of what we've branded as these young lions coming up, and they may be in their high school jazz ensemble or band, and, on the theme of listening to music. How important is that, and is there a way to deliberately include that within their routine? Think back to when you were in their shoes. What would you do in terms of active listening of music?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think that has to be part of a schedule as well. Like I said, hearing music is not the same as listening. In-depth listening. And we used to have listening sessions in my undergrad in Youngstown, where we'd all meet up at someone's place, and someone would put in this classic album and press play, and we listen. And then, to one track, and we talk about it, and then we go back to the same track at the beginning. We listen to the left hand of the piano player, talk about it. Then we go back, listen to the right hand of the trumpet piano player, go back. We did that for every musician. If it was, Miles Davis Quintet, for instance, that's how in depth we would listen. And that kind of listening, really, all of a sudden you are inside the music. And mistakes that you make, a lot of times with students, I know immediately what that listening is the issue, because they have the intent, they have the fingers, they have the technique, but they're not sounding the way it should sound, or classically would sound. And that's a listening issue. That's when, that's the difference between a mediocre player and a professional, solid player, is that sound. A mediocre player can play one note and it's not going to change the world. But someone that's, these musicians that we revere, they play one note and it's just like breathtaking. What is that? That comes from listening. That's not a technical thing necessarily. That's a listening thing. Getting so inside of the music that you start to hear every little nuance. So we're talking about the little things that they're hard to explain, but they're truly important. So yeah, I think setting aside a time, especially for the young musicians, part of the program with the Clearwater Jazz Holiday, it would be great. And I try to stress this every time I talk to them, that listening to as much as possible. You don't, like sometimes we're given this long list of people we have to listen to. You have to listen to them. I remember the first time I heard John Coltrane, I didn't like him. That didn't last too long, but yeah, listen to the people that blow you away and figure out exactly why, what nuance makes you so in love with their playing, and try to incorporate it into your own playing.
That's great, James. Thank you so much. These sessions fly by so quickly. We're getting here towards the end. I don't see any other questions in the chat feature. I was wondering maybe it would be appropriate to tell the group of some of the things that you plan to cover maybe in some of the upcoming sessions with us before we leave?
Yep, of course. Well, this has been a good beginner session for me because it's kind of leading us towards the other sessions. One which we have just been talking about was listening. So I'll get in depth about listening. You know, how to really get inside of listening. And it's something. It's a weird thing. You think, you know, we already know how to listen. You know, it's something that everyone does naturally, but it's not natural. So there is some learning that needs to take place as far as how to really be a great listener. Not only listening to albums, but also listening if you're playing in a trumpet section or playing in a brass quintet, listening to intonation, listening to yourself and how it relates to the person next to you. So that's one session. Another session is developing your own sound, which is something that we all are working towards. And that's where, you know, the split, you know, you listen to Miles Davis enough, you'll start to sound like him. Now, do you want to sound like him or do you want to sound like yourself? So that's kind of like the split, knowing where to stop copying and start bringing that sound into your own sound and developing your own sound. Was that it, or was there was another one? Oh, and then technique. Technique was another one, as far as because you know, there's this big problem, I'd say, for jazz, especially jazz trumpet players, that, you know, you got your jazz technique and you got your classical technique. You got your jazz setup, your classical setup, and I think it's a lot closer than we all think. And so trying to, you know, being able to play certain things on the trumpet in jazz is in part due to all the classical training that I've had. I'm in no way a classical player, but I've kind of stolen a lot of their technique and their exercises and etudes as far as technique to help my own jazz playing.
Cool. So we have a question from JJ Padishall. When you choose when you choose a new song for an album or a show, what's your process? And I think he has some clarification, like when it's coming up with an interpretation. And I'm happy to unmute JJ too. JJ, I just unmuted you. Did I get the spirit of your question?
Yeah, man. I was just kind of curious. You were talking about earlier about, you know, when kind of picking your repertoire for a new album. And I was just curious as to what is your process like when you're kind of coming up with an interpretation, deciding how you're going to interpret that tune and how you want to approach it for the album or something like, or even whether it's an album or even some of your shows, how you kind of go about that. Yeah,
that's a great question, JJ. Thank you. I think it's another one of those list making processes that you have your big goal. Your big goal is the big show. And I try to visualize the show in my mind. What kind of effect I want, what kind of idea, how do I want the people to be reacting? How do I, what kind of feeling do I want to give the people as they're going home, after the concert? So that's the big picture. And then it becomes the little bits, So I do a lot of tribute shows like Lee Morgan or Miles or Louis Armstrong. And first of all, I have my favorites like everyone else, but I do have to kind of concede sometimes and say, okay, I'm going to play one of these because certain other people like, this song, or it can't always be about me. So I have to think about the audience. But I also want to change it up. I don't want to have the same Miles show that I had the time before. So I want to keep it as interesting as possible. As far as, I think it's the same as far as an album, except it's more concrete. It's something that'll last forever. So there's a lot more decision making going on, and you're thinking about the flow more from the top to the bottom. And that's something on my album, Houston Person, the tenor player and my producer, he helped me out a lot with that because he's done it so many millions of times. you know, we were, even to the last day, we were figuring out the order of the tunes. We were trying to figure out which tunes worked, which ones didn't, because we were thinking of the big picture. So that's going back to the, you know, the goal, the big goal. How do I want this big goal to affect me and my listeners? And then how can I separate it little by little and try to achieve that goal?
James, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you being with us in these series. We're really looking forward to the next sessions with you. And we also appreciate everybody who participated with us today. We hope you liked these virtual sessions and that you'll come back for more. We cover we virtually cover almost every instrument and a lot of cool discussion topics. And we thank the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation, of course, and our supporters. And if you want to check out more from James, certainly go listen to his album, You're Gonna Hear From Me, wherever you stream your music. And if you are interested in getting in touch with James, he's shared his email with us. It's jamessuggs80@gmail.com. jamessuggs80@gmail.com. James, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you guys soon. Stay safe.